We are live. Good evening, it's 6:30 p.m. I call this meeting of the Bold ISD number 2534 Truth and Taxation hearing to order at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, November 25th. Is there an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Member Bowen and seconded by Member Oseth to approve the Truth and Taxation hearing agenda as in the board packet. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of approving the agenda as published in the packet, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries and the agenda is approved. Okay, we will move on to new business, and that is our public truth and taxation hearing for the 2024 payable 2025 property tax levy. So,
I will move this to.
move the camera over to the screen.
There we go. You guys have, I'll have copies of this on here.
Christine, you ready for presentation?
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Welcome to the Truth and Taxation hearing. I'm Christine Schmidt. I work at the Southwest West Central Service Cooperative, and I've been filling in as the interim business manager until we find a permanent solution. So we'll move right on to the presentation. I want to go to the next slide. So just a little history. Minnesota law requires cities, counties, and other governmental agencies to have specific steps every time you adopt a levy. So the full requirement is listed on the slide, and then one of the requirements is a single public meeting, which this fulfills that requirement. So the next slide. So for the taxation payable 2025, we're going to go over a little bit about the 2024 budget, provide information on expenses and revenues, discuss the proposed tax, and then allow for any questions and comments that anyone has. As you may or may not know, all school districts are required to divide into separate funds for their budgeting. So there's 4 main funds. General Fund is Fund 01, Food Services Fund 02, Community Services Fund 04. For Bold specifically, your pool is part of that community service. So on some reports you'll see it called 05, but it's actually part of the community service. And then debt service. Currently we're utilizing another fund, and that's the Building Construction Fund, Fund 6, that is just specific to the construction phase. It's not a main operating fund. So this is a little bit of background information. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this chart before, but this does a really good example of showing you how the levy flows through and all the different fiscal years that it touches. So right now in calendar, June through December, the Department of Education gathers all the information for the certified K-25 levy. So that's the phase we're in right now, and this is orange. If you follow along to the next phase of the orange, January to June, that's when we start collecting that data for the 26th budget. Following on to the third phase of the orange, July 25 through June of 26 is actually when you recognize and get the money that you're certifying tonight in December of 24. You actually get that money in the fall of 25 and spring of 26. That's how long it takes to flow through. So then in July and November of 26, that's when the auditors evaluate and make sure that we've recorded everything how it needs to be. So the process starts now, goes all the way through November of 26. And that happens each year. So it's a nice graph that just shows you how all that money flows through. So this slide, what we're doing is we're comparing the 23-24 budgeted or actual revenue to the 24-25 budgeted revenue. So this is specific just to your revenues, and it breaks it down by those operating main funds. So the general fund, you'll see that the 23-24 actual is higher than the budgeted 24-25. The main purpose for that is we will not have the influx of COVID funds that we had in the last fiscal year. So as the COVID funds taper off, the revenue that we get also decreases. Food service, we have that decreasing slightly as well, and we received some federal supply chain assistance funds in Fund 2 that we will not be getting anymore either. So again, just the residual effect of those federal dollars tapering off and no longer being around. The community service, that one also is decreasing. That one's a little more substantial decrease. And the main reason for that is because in the prior 2 years, we had an influx of dollars from the insurance recovery funds due to the pool fire. So we're not gonna be getting those insurance proceeds. So it kind of inflated the revenue the last 2 years. This is more of a realistic revenue of what we're expecting to get. And then the last one is the debt service. That one's a huge jump. And what the debt service is that's the tax collection and the state aids that we use to make those bond payments for your construction project. So last year that bond project came on. This is the first year of the revenue that you guys will be getting. So I have a few different graphs, and this kind of breaks some of that down and shows you a little bit of examples. So these two are the revenue by source. So that means what is making up that revenue that's coming in. So for the general fund, Fund 1, your levy is about 15% of the revenue that you get. So the taxpayer levy accounts only for 15% of your general fund. For the food service, that you get no levy authority for Fund 2 food service. And when you look at the pie, the biggest green section for the general fund revenue is 78%, and that comes from state dollars. So the biggest chunk of revenue you get for general fund is state. For the food service, it's kind of a bluish color. That one is actually federal. So the bulk of your food service revenue dollars comes from a federal source, the National School Lunch Program. Continuing on to the other two operating funds, community service and debt service, your levy accounts for 19% of community service, and then your levy for debt service is actually 45% of the revenue you get in. So debt service is the heaviest levy component. The school building bond ag credit applies to farmland, and it excludes the house, garage, and 1 acre, and that's at 70% for FY25 and beyond. So 70% is actually given back in state aids. So moving over to expenditures, some of this follows the same trend as the revenue. So for the expenditures, we're comparing the actual 23-24 to what we're budgeting for the 24-25. And the general fund goes down as well. And again, it's that loss of influx of COVID dollars. If we're not getting the revenue, we're not going to have the expenses. So the general fund is pretty much exactly the same as the revenue. Fund 2, that one is slightly higher. We are projecting an increase in food costs due to inflation and some increased labor costs. So these are preliminary dollars, but we do have an estimate of that going up. And then again, we're not going to have the influx of the revenue from the COVID funds, so it kind of makes us take a little bit more out of our food service fund. Community service, that one we're also projecting to go down, and that's again, we're not going to have the expenses associated with the fire. We didn't have the revenue, we're not going to have the expense. And the community service, especially for the pool, that's pretty much budgeted as neutral, so it should be pretty low. The debt service is listed as 0, and in our original budget we did have that listed. And I think the bond payment schedule wasn't known when this budget was put together. So when we do a revised budget, we will build in some expenses for debt service to go along with the revenue that we got. Now we have an established bond schedule, so we'll make sure that that's put in the revised, but it will match. It's usually slightly lower than the revenue that we get. So for the expenditures, I broke these out a few different ways. So this one is actually by program, so it's broken out by the program that's utilizing those expenditures. And the top 3 categories that your district has is going to be regular instruction, special education, and pupil support. So a lot of times people don't know what pupil support is, and pupil support is really anything that's supporting the students. So transportation, health services, social workers, things like that. So the things that are supporting the students, but not the direct instruction of the students. So then I did the same pie charts for the expenditures, and this one again represents the program. So again, as you can see, regular instruction, pupil support, and special ed are the largest chunk of the pie. And when you see it as a pie chart like the green, that really shows that almost half of what you're spending is on direct pupil instruction. So another way to look at the expenses, people like to see them different ways to see really where your money's going, is this is by the object, which is the last digits of the series. And so this is things like salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, and materials. So again, you can see that the majority of what you're spending would be for salaries and benefits. The next highest category is purchase services, which is a little deceiving because a lot of the purchase services are probably salaries and benefits for people that you're purchasing services. So your transportation, your technology coordination, your special education, and currently your business services, those are all purchase services, which is really supplies and which is really going to be your salaries and benefits for those people. And then when we look at the pie chart for those, on the next slide, you can see again where salaries is 48%, benefits at 11%, purchase services at 31%. So if you add those three sections, that's 90% of your expenditures right there for your whole district. It's just going to be salaries, benefits, and your purchase services. So it shows you're pretty lean on supplies at 7% of your budget. So that's pretty good. The money's really going towards the people. So this is a budget publication. We're required by law to do this budget publication. This will also be sent to your county auditors for your counties. And what this shows is this shows your beginning balance where you started the year in fiscal 24. That's the far left column. The middle column, June 30th, is the actuals. That's where we ended the year. And then the far right column is 25. That's where we expect to be. So the one column, if you look at this really closely, I would probably take out that building construction fund because that's just kind of an estimate. We don't really know when those dollars are going to be spent. Some of them will be in 25, some of them will be in 26, some of them will be in 27. So if you look at all the other funds, those are the operating funds. They'll give you a good idea. But the one number that I'd like to point out is in the bottom right-hand corner. If anyone ever wonders how much it costs to educate one student for your school district, it costs $17,000 to educate one student.
So that's physically a student, not a PPE.
Yep, one student, $17,000. So this is a levy comparison, and this is taken from your levy doc. And so what this shows is it's comparing your 23-24 levy to your 24-25 levy, and it shows the increase or decrease. So the general fund, Fund 1, has a slight increase of 1.47. Your community service has an increase of 12.41, and your debt service at 6.7. So the average overall for your levy is increasing by 4.9%, so just under 5%. And then this is the levy utilization. So the debt redemption, that is the bulk of the levy, as we've talked about, and then general fund and community service. So community service only accounts for 2% of your overall levy. The bulk of it is your debt service. So sometimes people ask me, what are the variables? What could make my levy change? Well, it's really driven based on property and market value. So if there's changes in the market value, that's going to change. If your property value at home changes, that's going to change the amount of levy you have. The other things that you can't control as far as your house would be if there's an ag credit, which is a good thing, if there's voter-approved referendums, and the state legislation is probably the biggest wild card that we really can't control, but it does affect everyone's levy. And then the last thing would be school board action. Those are the things that can change our levy. So the general fund, the main general fund, this is the increase or decrease in each of the reserved categories. So the biggest reason that your general fund referendum would change up or down is student counts. The fluctuation of your students coming in and out, what we're budgeting and projecting coming in and out. So the levy is based on our estimate ADMs, and then we will have a true-up factor in the next 2 years. So if we have adjustments from when those are trued up, that will be positive or negative, and then our ADMs. All the ones listed on your slide that you can see, those mainly are due to the formula calculations from the state. So as the legislation makes changes, they adjust the formulas where sometimes the levy is higher or sometimes the aid is higher. So any adjustments that they make affect all of these categories as well. And that's the main driver for the changes that you see here. So some went up, some went down. In total, it became a positive of $20,510. So I know that was really quick and a lot of information. So is there any questions about any of it? Anything that I didn't cover? In December is when you'll be doing the resolution to certify this levy. Thank you for your time. So, yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. That's fine.
Have a good ride home.
Thank you for all you do.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay, also as part of the hearing, we've had the presentation and a Q&A period. So now we need to give the public a reasonable amount of time to comment and ask questions. We have no one here in the room. I suspect there's those online, but to comment, you have to be in, or ask questions, you've got to be in the room. So, I think we'll wait maybe 1 minute here to see if anyone walks in. And at that point, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Entertain a motion to adjourn the truth and taxation hearing as we don't have any public comment.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? It's been moved by member Oseth and seconded by member Klaus to adjourn. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to adjourn carries.